Shalom, all praises to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham Racha Kodash, the more honor to the apostles and elders of great millstone that rule well and labor in the word and doctrine. Shalom, meaning peace. May that be into the elect of the nation of Israel. This is going to be a quick hit on a specific word I came across today when looking up some etymonline.com, right? Etym online, some etymology, meaning what the words of truth or the truth about the words, right? Etymos, going back to that word truth, logos, going back to words or study. Really, it means words. But so in 2nd Maccabees chapter 6, and again, this is to make a point based on a certain word I came across and an interesting definition of it. So 2nd Maccabees chapter 6 says, not long after this, and we're not going to run down into the whole history, but you should be aware of it. Maccabees, if you're aware of the issue of the Gentiles, right, of the New Testament coming into the fold, when we will argue till blue in the face, or after the second admonition, right? We'll argue all day long, if anyone wants to to contest it, that the Gentiles of the New Testament entitled to salvation are in fact Israelites that have been Hellenized, right, or even gone into the ways of the other nations, right, Hellenized to become as the Greeks, which that was the largest form of Israel losing their culture, their heritage in that sense, prior to the falling away of 68 to 72 AD or to 74 AD. I have to double check, go back over them. Nonetheless, right, the Gentiles that salvation is promised for, we teach, is, right, Israelites in the ways of the other nations. Now, this is a good example of certain things that the other nations, the Greeks specifically, certain things that the Greeks were doing, that the Israelites, were compelled to join unto if they were, lacking in faith, faithless generation. So not long after this, the king sent an old man of Athens to compel the Jews to depart from the laws of their fathers and not to live after the laws of their God. Now it also says about this, about Antiochus, and it said he would depart from the Jews' laws to join his religion, right? So when we leave our laws, which is a religion, going to be technical, when we depart from our laws, it becomes a religion, right? Our laws are our default, whereas many people say nowadays, Psalms 14:1, the foolish way is to be an atheist, right? Not to believe in any deity, any power, any quote-unquote God, and in fact to be of an atheistic persuasion, and anything outside of that default is a religion. Well, we're told, our laws are the default, and when we depart from them, we've joined unto another nation's religion. That being said, right, verse 2, and to pollute also the temple in Jerusalem, and to call it the temple of Jupiter Olympus, right? So when you have the Olympics, goes back to, again, these heathenistic, Hellenistic ways of worship, manners of worship. And to pollute also the temple in Jerusalem, and to call it the temple of Jupiter Olympus, and that in Garazim of Jupiter, the defender of strangers, as they did desire that dwelt in the place. The coming in of this mischief was sore and grievous to the people, right? So a lot of Israelites were mortified, right? Were put to spiritual death by this. It seemed like the whole earth, as they knew it, was ending. Because Alexander, he was not, a proponent. He wasn't teaching Torah and trying to follow it himself, but he pretty much let the Jews alone, compared to, right, one of his generals or descendants thereof, Antiochus Epiphanes, which deserves a whole videos of itself. But just to touch on it briefly, right, the way he went literally murdering, slaughtering the Israelites that were not conforming to the way of the Greeks, and that was a much more harsher way of dealing with the Jews, right, than his predecessors. That's why he's so famous for that first abomination of desolation, the Greek version of that. You had the Roman version, again 70 AD, the temple being destroyed, that falling away. But we also, as a people, generally fell away from our culture around them times. So it says verse 4 explains why it was so sore and grievous to the people. It says, for the temple was filled with riot and reveling by the Gentiles, who dallied with harlots and had to do with women within the circuit of the holy places, and besides that, brought in things that were not lawful. These Gentiles are the actual Greeks, the bloodline going back to E, right? Our twin according to what we teach, not the Arab, which some do teach. Although you're gonna have a quote unquote confusion of faces, that's an erroneous term, but it's become, a misnomer, a misunderstanding of, confusion of face means shame, but people use it referring to people that are of a different nation than they may physically look like. So you're gonna have people of another nation that don't physically look like the typical Israelite, the typical Elamite, the typical Moabite, right? So you are gonna have that. But generally, these people go back to E. And they dallied with harlots, right? When you read about that temple harlotry, it's not just dealing with a prostitute, but it's in fact dealing with a prostitute unto their gods, which you can read about, you can research. It also talks about in Corinthians, a temple harlot. You go into the blue letter, and you can look that up. That was a common practice to have sex unto their gods, right? So when you go into this, the ways of Dionysus, the ways of Bacchus, right? It talks about how they had the Jews in procession with ivy leaves around them, right? That's the Bacchanalia, the Bacchus, basically the ancient version of Benjamite Carnival, right? Caribbean Carnival, which that's heavy in the Jake community. And that is, drunkenness of wine, excess of wine, sorry, and, lustful behavior. And I mean lusting towards things that don't belong, or lusting in an inappropriate place, right? There's nothing wrong with lusting after your wife, for example, who is, you're meant to have things to do with, and there's nothing wrong with, lusting after something that, there's nothing wrong with lust, but in a marriage, right? But obviously behind closed doors, not all out in the street, but that's the way they do it. Anyway, so dallying with harlots, having to do with the circuit of holy places, looking at the word work, right, this, and I saw the word orgy, was a word that was used there, bear with me. So the word orgy, it says orgies, plural, secret rites or ceremonies in the worship of certain Greek and Roman gods, especially Dionysus, right? Especially Dionysus, from French, orgies, from Greek, orgies, secret rites, all right? So especially those of Bacchus, which if you go into 2nd Maccabees, I believe it is the 6th chapter. Oh no, we're in the 6th chapter, the 2nd chapter, where it talks about how the Greeks basically forced that upon the children of Israel. So secret rites, this would perfectly fit, especially those of Bacchus. As I just mentioned, that's pretty much like the West Indian carnival of today, walking in great drunkenness, right? Lust upon people, or people, and all in public as well, which really, that's a shame. That's between a marriage, right? Marriage is not as this world teaches, but again, that's another video in itself. Secret rites, especially those of Bacchus, this is traditionally considered a derivative of the root ergon, work or activity. So the modern term, is getting up to work or activity. The modern form, obviously, to say it just straight up, is group sex. Now this is, if you go into Wisdom of Solomon, the 14th chapter, around the 21st verse, it talks about how the beginning, or the forming of idols, was the beginning of spiritual fornication, the beginning of spiritual adultery. So they are doing that, they are fornicating, but spiritually, right? So you go into idolatry, it's spiritual adultery, right? But I found this interesting, the word orgy, going back to secret rites, basically worship of gods. And they would get up to this, if you go into the history of the Greco-Roman origins of what today is known as Valentine's Day as well. I can't remember what they call that. You can search that up though. When you go into it historically, it's very interesting, again, that something that's spiritually perverted, right, from our perspective at least, depending on who you ask, it's linked to this word that now colloquially is sexually perverted. It goes back to Greco-Roman worship, which of course we, as the children of Israel, are not to involve ourselves in, right? The Lord made all these idols for the other nations, but Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai created the heavens, right? The God of Israel. That being said, quick hit, Lord, when it was edifying, That being said, Ka Halayim La Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham Racha Kudash. Shalom.